So again, we brought up the miles per gallon.html program. We're not really going to do anything with it, but we need that to run this. And we're bringing up the miles per gallon.js program. We just added these lines. When you make constants, it's a convention, they're in uppercase, because that's supposed to send a signal to the person looking at your program. You can't change these. Constants are set up so that once they've been given a value, you don't change them. Does that make sense? All right. Do the names make sense? You should try to always give constants really meaningful names. All right. I mean, I could have went and said minimum miles driven, maximum mile. I mean, I think that's good enough that it makes sense. All right. So now what that's going to do is after we read these values in, we're going to check each one of them to make sure that they're within range. Does that make sense? So in other words, by the time we get to this line, we're going to make checks. We're going to make another check that we'll talk about in a minute. It'll be impossible for you to put in anything non-numeric, including blank. And it'll be impossible for you to put in a number for miles driven that's less than 1 or greater than 1,000. And for gallons used, it'll be impossible to have one that's less than 1 or greater than 100. Does all that make sense? All right. In order to do that, imagine for a second you're driving down the road. You've all seen, I'm sure you've both seen this. You're driving down the road and all of a sudden the road ends and you can go that way or you can go that way. You've seen that, right? Okay. So I'm driving down the road. Let's assume it's a one-way road so I can't back up. So I can turn to the left or I can turn to the right. All right. So if I signal left, then I'll turn left. Otherwise, or else, if I signal to the right, I'll turn right. Does that make sense? All right. Well, that's kind of what we're going to write right now. So we're going to come in here where we've got this, and I'm going to put in a couple blank lines here and here. Okay. And I'm going to say this. Okay, I want to put this value in here, just like we have. But now I'm going to check, and I'm going to say this. If, and I'm putting it in parentheses, if miles driven is less than min miles driven, or miles driven is greater than max miles driven. Now it's hard to see, so I can either make this a little smaller, which is what I'm going to do, or I can put this on a couple lines, whichever is easiest for you. All right? Now, if that happens, what does that mean? I'm asking you this question. If this is true, what does that mean? Come on, you can look at it and figure it out. What does that mean if that's true?
The miles driven are less than the minimum.
Or it's greater than the maximum. So in other words, what I'm doing right here, for lack of better words, is I'm making what's called a range check. Does that make sense? All right. So if I do that, then everything I want to do, I have to put inside of curly braces. So I'm going to come up with an alert that says input for miles driven out of range. Re-enter. And I'm going to let you know that it should be 1 through 1,000. All right? Then all I have to do is repeat this line. Now I'm coming right back to this, but I want to run this. Okay, I want to run this because I want to show you there's two problems with this. We're going to have to make more changes to this. Look on the screen. There are two problems with this right now. All right? So I'm going to save it and I'm going to run the program. And I want to show you what both the problems are. Here's the first one. All right? It doesn't like something, so let's see if I forgot a parenthesis or something. Line 18, it doesn't like something I put in there. Why would it give me an error on that? Used. Mean is not defined. Add element on click. In line 18. Oh, it's telling me there's a problem in my HTML. Alright, let's look at the HTML then. Line 18, it doesn't like this. It's funny because I didn't change it and it worked before. I'm just wondering if I take that out of there for now. We need the ID. Alright, but I just don't take yours out. I just want to see if I take that out, if it fixes it. Run. Still doesn't like it. Missing initializer in const declaration. Yeah, it's because I got rid of a line. It doesn't like this. Oh, jeez. It's me. I'm sorry. Okay. The error is right here. Don't say int. I was working on something in another language before. Do that. That should fix it. Now, I should be able to come back and put in that line again. Alright, I want to see if it runs now. Come on. Select the token. Line 32 and means not defined. Alright, we have told it body boom on click main. There's that. Function main. That's good. What's the other error? Line 32. Okay, I'm missing a parenthesis. See what, and I don't know if your editors do this, but look on the screen. Notice if I put my mouse on this parenthesis, see that? How the other one turns color? And if I do it here, but if I do it here, it doesn't have a matching one. So that means I left one out there. So let's try running it one more time. All right. Now, I'm going to purposely, I want to make sure this works. Okay? So I'm going to put in a negative number. -6. Okay, let's see if my code catches that. What did it do? Okay, didn't like what I put in there. So it says miles drive not defined. What does that mean? Miles means that I can't type. Alright, so I'm going to put in a number out of range. -88. Is it going to give me an error message? Yeah. Input out of range. Re-enter. Okay, good, right? Okay, so I'm a jerk, so I put in -88 again. Now it took it. And if, when you put in an if statement like I showed you, an if is known as a one-time shot. In other words, if I say to you, if you're less than 8, so I ask you your age, okay? Let's say, I think you said you're 20. Okay, so I think 21 is the legal age for buying booze in this state. I don't even know, I don't drink. But let's say you walk into a place, okay? And you attempt to buy a 24-pack of beer. And the guy says to you, how old are you? And you go 20. And the guy says, I can't sell it to you. Oh, no, I'm 21. Okay. Then he sells it to you. See what I'm saying? That's what an if does. It checks once, and it gives you the chance it gives you the chance to basically catch the error once, but if it comes up again, there's going to be a problem. Here's the other thing. What if I put nothing in here? I get NaN. Let's fix both those problems right now. All right, we're going to fix both of these problems right now. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to change this if to what's called a while. So make that a while. All right? Now, why? Who cares? Let's run it. You'll see why I'm doing this. All right, so here I'm running it. I'm going to put something out of range. 3333. It's got an error. Resubmit. 3333. It's going to keep me stuck in there until I put in a number between 1 and 1,000. All right? So what if I leave it blank? All right, let's try it with leaving it blank. Now it still took that. Well, that isn't good. All right, so there's one more change we have to make in this. We're almost there. But there's three things that can happen here that are bad. One is you put in a number that's less than 1. Does that make sense? You put in 0 or a negative number. Another thing that's bad is if you put in a number that's greater than 1,000. The last thing that's bad is if you put something in there that's not numeric. So we have to make one more check in here. Look on the screen, please. I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to put it right there. But I'm going to say this. Look on the screen, please. Is NaN. That's saying if what I put in there is not numeric, that's this check, or if what I put in there is less than 1, or if what I put in there is greater than 1,000. So if any of those things happen, those are my 3 error conditions. Does that make sense? So I'm going to change my comment up here to range check / validation. I'm making sure that everything that gets put in there is valid. I'll take your question in a second. I want to run this again. Why? Because I want to show you how now we have handled that case. So we come in here, we're going to leave it blank. Now we get input is out of range, re-enter. And if we put in a number that's too small, input out of range, re-enter. And if we put in a number that's too big, input out of range, re-enter. Now if we put in nothing, input out of range, re-enter. So we've done that. So now you have to put in a valid number. All right, so now we're sure, we can be 100% sure that once we get to down here, what we put in here was valid. Does that make sense? All right, so we're going to write a similar thing for gallons. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to write the same kind of thing I just wrote. In other words, range check / validation. Now, I want you to help me write this. What do we have to do inside of here? What do we have to do inside of here? True or false? Basically the same thing we did in there, except what? What are we checking now? What are we checking? Yeah. So every place in here, I'm just going to copy this because I'm lazy. I'm going to copy this whole thing right there, and I'm going to paste it in here, and I'm going to change everything that said miles driven. I'm going to change it to gallons used.
say that?
That's all I did.
You go back up and
Yeah. But what I want you to see, I'm going to make this smaller for a second. Those are both of our checks. It's pretty much the same check, but in the first case, I'm checking miles driven. In the second case, I'm checking gallons used. Does what we're doing make sense?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of like
It's definitely another language.
a couple of years, no, many years ago. I was a junior in high school. All right, it's a true story. It's not no big story or anything. But I'm a junior in high school. They had a rule where I went to high school. Freshmen had to start a day earlier than sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Are you with me? So I go into class, and I was told by my counselor I need to take 2 years of a foreign language. So starting as a junior, I signed up for Spanish. So I'm walking in there the first day, and the students are like, "Hola, ¿qué es su nombre?" And I'm like, "What? ¿Qué es su nombre? What's your name?" And honest to goodness, I'm thinking, why do these people know so much more than I do? They knew 1 day's worth of Spanish. So they probably knew 20 or 30 words, but they knew them very well. That's where you are right now. So if you said totally makes sense, I can write this myself, I would be surprised. Unless you'd already done something like this with another, using another program. Now look on the screen. I'm going to move this down, but I'll move it back up. I'm asking you this question. Give you a hint. The answer is no. Do we have to make any checks on this field? Why? Yeah, and it's also because, yes, not only is it the answer, but it's this one that we already validated divided by this one that we already validated. So by the time we get to line 48, these two must be valid. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And if we had used ifs in here, they wouldn't necessarily be valid. But by using a while, while means this. Look on the screen if you would. This means while any of this is true, while anything in there is true, do this. So then you put this in and you check it again. You only fall out of a while when what you're looking for in here is false. How would it be false? It's false if we put in a valid value. All right. What we're using in here with this while, it's called a while loop. Imagine that this room was filled with students. Okay? And let's say that Rankin starts instituting a new policy. You get a C in the class, you get $25. You get a B in the class, you get $50. You get an A in the class, you get $100. Make sense? All right. Now, what I could do is I could make, and we're going to talk about this, but a little bit later. I could come in and I could say, hey, let's see, I'm going to have 26 students. I'll call them student 1, student 2, student 3, 26 of them. Okay? Then I could sit there and I could write this code for each one of them. I could write this code in here 26 times. The problem is, what is it? That's 15 lines of code. It's 400 lines. But what you'll see a little bit later is I can write it once and use it 26 times. That's pretty good. That's what we're going to be moving to by the end of the period today. All right. But my question is, all the stuff that's in there that you see on the screen, everything that's in there in gray, is there anything that doesn't make sense?
Yeah.
What?
Don't get what those straight lines are for.
This means or. This means this, or this, or this.
Okay, and then I don't understand the gallons used equal parts.
This says, this is what comes up on the screen. Whoops. Right here, this is what comes up on the screen. Enter miles driven, and then there's a box for it. And by default, we just put 1,000 in there. All right. This says take whatever we put in there and attempt to convert it to a number. Parse int means convert it to a whole number. That's all it means. If we wanted you to be able to put in fractional parts, we could have said parse float instead of parse int. Then you could put in like 350.67 miles. All right. But I just set it up for whole numbers. That's all. All right. Anything else? Any other questions?
No, that's not okay.
All right, so again, we're writing a payroll program. All right, and let's just assume that we're writing it and we want to make it generic so any company can use it. Doesn't matter what it is. So for any company, they can come in there and they can change these. Max per hour, min per hour, max hours worked, min hours worked, etc. Does that make sense? All right. So then you come in here and they input that stuff. Now you can be sure when you get down to here and you say something, let's assume there's no overtime, and you say gross pay equals hours worked times hourly rate. You can be sure that both those values that you did up here for hours worked and hourly rate are valid. So we are learning to input and we are learning to validate. What you did in Chapter 2 was you wrote 2 programs. But in neither of those programs did you have to do any validation. So we're adding the validation. If you remember, I told you yesterday that anywhere up to 75% of the code you write is defensive code. It's validation code. Because you don't want to let garbage into the system. That's what we're doing, is we're making sure there's no garbage in the system. Does that make sense? If you've typed this one, don't retype this one. Take this, what's in here, copy it, and put it in here. Just changed all of the miles driven to gallons used. Be real careful. Look on the screen. Be real careful. If you copy this to here, that you change all of the miles driven here to gallons used, and you change min miles driven to min gallons used, and max miles driven to max gallons used. Does that make sense? So there's a mistake. See, you found one. Good. You're debugging. You may or may not have heard this. No, a true story. One of the pioneers of programming languages, all right, no joke. This was a lady who was a U.S. Naval Rear Admiral. She's been dead a few years, but she lived into her 90s. Her name was Grace Hopper. She was about 4 feet tall. All right. And back, I don't know if you've ever seen the pictures, back in the days where computers were as big as this room, and they had these big vacuum tubes in them, all right, and they'd go out all the time, and you'd have to write machine language, which were zeros and ones. She was writing this program, and she was getting wrong results. I want you to listen to this. You can keep typing, but I want you to listen to this. She was getting wrong results. And she went back and looked, and her program was perfect, but she still kept getting bad results. So somebody said, well, maybe it's the hardware. Maybe it's the computer. So she took, this is not a joke. I'm not making this up. Even if you think it's funny, it's not funny anyway. They took off the back of the computer, and in one of those vacuum tubes, there was a dead moth in there. That was the first computer bug. They removed that. Then they were able to put the tube in correctly, and they debugged the program. That's how debugging came to be. That's why it's called debugging. All right. Ever since then, errors in a computer program have been known as bugs, and the act of getting the errors out is known as debugging. And I will tell you, now this is going to sound maybe stupid, but if you're looking at a program, all right, so you're looking at a program and you've got a bug in it. You can't figure out what it is. And you're like, you know what? I'm not raising my hand. I want to figure out what this bug is. If you've looked at the program for more than a couple of minutes, walk away. Walk to the bathroom, go to the bathroom, get a drink, come back 5 minutes later, because now you've got a clearer head. All right? I've literally, there was one day in my class, again, you may find this funny, I was working on a program before class, and I'm like, geez, what the hell is wrong with this? And I literally, this young lady was walking by, she goes, you know you missed a semicolon there on line 36. No, I didn't see that. She was just walking by and saw it. I was so invested in the program, it's like a horse with blinders on. I couldn't see out here, I could only see right there. So if that happens to you, if you've got an error or something just isn't making sense, that's what you have to do. When you do your first test, which will be next week, on chapters 1, 2, and 3, you're going to write something just like this that's going to have a button, and you're going to go and you're going to put stuff in there. All right? It's going to be very similar to what you see on the screen right now.
I know, but are they going to have to do more with it?
Not yet, no. The only thing you're going to have to do is anything that's in 1, 2, or 3, you're responsible for. There's nothing from chapter 1 I can put on a program. So it's 2 and 3. So if you read the stuff from chapter 2.
Do we have to make a website with it though?
No. Your HTML is going to be like this. You're going to put a button in there, and that's it. All right? Eventually, all right, yes, but not for a while. Is there anything in this program that does not make sense?
It's just honestly kind of hard to look at. Yeah,
but when it's explained, does the logic in there make sense? Yeah? But I will tell you that the first bit of code I was given when I became a professional programmer, I was in charge of about 10,000 lines of code. Well, that's pretty much. Yeah, on a system that was 5 million lines of code. That's how many things were in there to make your telephone work. And I was responsible for if somebody got peeved, I call you up on the phone and you say bad things to me, so I hang the phone up real hard. Back in the days when we had rotary phones, that could break a phone. Now when I say break it, I don't mean into pieces, but you'd hit it down real hard, you'd pick it back up, you'd have no dial tone. All right? And AT&T didn't like that because every time you didn't have dial tone, they were losing money. Does that make sense? So it was called peripheral control. The peripheral was the device. I was in charge of making sure that it didn't break when people did bad things to it. Now if somebody took out their phone and started doing this and broke it in half, I couldn't fix that. But I had to write the software that did that. And it was amazing that was about 5,000 lines of code. Why? Because we had to try to handle every error condition we could. So if somebody, was like, oh, what if they do this? What if they do this? What if they do that? So we had tons of code in there that was like this. All right. Now imagine that, again, so let's say, because this is what we're going to do. All right. So let's say that you come in here and you're doing a payroll program. All right. So now let's think about what we have to do. We have to, instead of miles driven and gallons used, we've got hours worked and hourly rate. Does that make sense? I think you could write that right now and make these checks. I think we could have a min hours, a max hours, a min rate, and a max rate, and you could do that. I think you could. All right. But okay, so fine. What's the problem? Well, now we have to say, well, once they've got that, and we get in here, this is a pretty simple, pretty simple formula. Would you agree with that? Maya, that if you drove 200 miles last week, you go and fill up with your gas tank, and it takes 8 gallons, you're getting 25 miles to the gallon because you can do the division. All right. But, for example, if it's a payroll program, now in here, what if we do have overtime? So now what I have to check is not only does it fall within this range, but if that's my hours worked, if the hours are greater than 40, now I've got to figure out how much overtime they have. Does that make sense? When you come in here on Monday, we're going to start brand new, and we're going to write about 5 or 6 iterations of a payroll program. And we're just going to keep beating it and beating it and beating it. And you're going to call the first one Payroll01.js. And we'll, like we did yesterday, we'll hard code a value in there. You'll hard code your first name, your last name, the hours worked, the hourly rate. Boom. That's everything. Then we'll go back and we'll redo it where you can enter your first name, you can enter your last name, you can enter your hours worked, you can enter your hourly rate, but we won't do any validation. And you'll see how that'll break. Then we'll do it a third time where we'll add this. Then we'll do it a fourth time where we'll add overtime. You see how we're building on each one of them? If you told me this totally makes sense and I understand every single frickin' thing you did, I'd be surprised. I will tell you, this is no joke. The first time that I had to write an actual computer program, I decided to take a class, a summer class, and I took it at a local university extension. It wasn't where I was going to school. I just took it because I wanted that knowledge. And the first time they gave a program. All right, they gave the program, and I must have looked really bad. I must have been white-faced. You know, the instructor said, "Are you all right?" At the end of, yeah, I'm fine. I went over to the library. I didn't even know what the words meant that he said. And it wasn't like it is today where you can go to a library. There's a computer there and you can look stuff up. We had the old, if you've ever seen them, card catalog, where you'd open it up and there'd be a bunch of index cards. So I was looking up words. It was a math program. I literally found a math book from the 1960s. I read through the book, so at least I knew what the heck it was I was trying to do. These people were walking out and I heard them laughing. What a stupid assignment. I've almost got this done. I wrote it longhand while he was talking, and I'll have it done by tonight. And I'm thinking, geez, I don't even know what the hell this stuff means. And I thought, I'm an idiot. They're all smart people, and I'm an idiot. I got an A in the class. Not because I'm that smart, but over time, I learned. All right? But at first, it made no sense to me. And after a while, of course, the second program was easier. Then the third program was easier. But the logic was more complex. But I understood how I had to incorporate something that I'd done earlier. Does that all make sense? All right. That's what we're going to keep doing. All right. Now, I'm going to give you a break because this is a lot to sink in, drink in. But first, look on the screen here. Now I want to see. So I'm going to run this. I'm going to put nothing in there. All right. Handles that. I'm going to put in non-numeric. Handles that. I'm going to put in a number out of range. Handles that. I'm going to put in a number out of range. Handles that. So it handles those four conditions, correct? All right, now I'll just leave it 300. Now, notice now instead of miles driven, it's gallons used. I'm going to run the same checks. Leave it blank. Something's wrong. See that? Look. All right. So what's wrong? I've got to go back and look at my code. I didn't even know there was a problem. So gallons used, while it's less than the minimum gallons, or it's greater, I don't know, gallons used, gallons used. Did I spell something differently? Nope, not there. One in 100. Oh, I put in, yeah, but I put in 300. Ah, that was okay. And this, gallons used, gallons used, gallons used.
It's so weird. I don't know how to open it as a web page.
Yeah. Don't open up your JS file, open up your HTML file. That's what you did. Look, if I look on the screen here. Here I'm in my JavaScript, okay? If I say run in Chrome, it's exactly what I get. Because you can't run JavaScript. JavaScript itself, it's only executable through the HTML. So it looks like I still have an error in my HTML. I want to fix this before we take a break. Run, run. Now I know if I put a number in here, it's okay. So 300 for miles driven. Gallons used. I'm going to leave that blank. It's broken. Look on the screen. It's broken. So I think I know what it is, but let's double check. Gallons used, no. While it's not, is not at NaN, see, it didn't take this.
So which one is it not taking?
This one. This check right here.
The
I put a non-numeric value in there, and it took it and it kept going. So I'm looking in here to see if I can figure out what my problem is. Is NaN. Now, this is case sensitive. If you do this and you make the n's in here lowercase, it's not going to work. All right? I'm looking, though, to try to see if I spelled something wrong. Gallons used, gallons used, gallons used, gallons used. Min gallons used, max gallons used. I'm trying to figure out what the problem is.
And then that second parenthesis on that bottom line.
Here?
Yeah.
That goes with this one.
Okay.
See that?
Yeah.
So when I highlight this one, how that one lights up. These two are together, those two are together, those two are together. All right. So I'm trying to figure out what the problem is. Parse int, prompt, enter gallons used. Well, and we're going to see if we can figure out why. Now let's do this. Let's check and see if we put in valid things that are valid. Now that works. So when you put in stuff that's valid, it works. I'm going to run it again. I'm going to put in a miles per gallon that's out of range. See that? It's taking that too. You see that? That's wrong. There's something in my check that has to be incorrect. So I have to figure out what it is. Min gallons used. Min gallons used. Now, right now it won't. If you want to make it work with get decimals, change that from parse int to parse float with a big F. Then it will. It'll work with both, yeah. All right, so if you want to do that, go ahead and do that. I want to figure out what's wrong here, though. All right, while. So I have to change these as well if I want to do that. So. Like I said, if you want to do that, that's fine. So, prompt, enter gallons used. All right. While is not NaN, gallons used, or this, or this. All right, this is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to see if this check is even running. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I'm going to come in here. I'm not getting this right here. It's not saying this, correct? Look at the screen. It's not doing this. It's not giving me that alert that says input for gallons used out of range. Would you agree with that? All right. So I want to see where it's going from here to here. All right. So I'm going to come in here right before the while, and I'm going to do an alert, and I'm going to say the value inputted for gallons used was, and I'm going to print it out, plus gallons used. Does that make sense? All right. So I'm going to run this. I'll just leave that as 1,000. I'm going to put in here hello. Value inputted was NaN. See that? All right. That's actually what it should say, because when I try to do that parse on it, now look, input forget, now it worked. So it is telling me to do it again. So I'm going to do it again. I'm going to leave it blank. All right, input for gallons used, out of range. Try it again. Input for gallons used, out of range. Try it again. Input for gallons used, out of range. Now it's valid. Now it worked. Why? I don't have a clue. Why did putting that statement in there make it start working? I don't know. So the statement I just put in, this is just called a debugging statement. I'm going to get rid of it. I don't know. That's why I'm getting rid of it. Now it appears to work. I don't know why it wasn't working and why it's working now. I don't know. I have absolutely no idea. All right? What I'm most concerned with is not that, but is, yeah, it may seem clumsy, it may be clunky. What Maya said is correct. It's a new language. It's called a programming language for a reason. What you find, though, is after you learn one language, it's much easier to learn another one. Now, that isn't always true with foreign languages, because I know people who know Chinese, even more, Japanese, where if you say one word and you don't enunciate it exactly right, the same word can mean two totally different things. And I know people who've done that and have learned another language, and they're like, yeah, it was really a lot easier. But if they go the other way, they learn like Spanish, and then they go to a language like Japanese, they're like, Spanish didn't help me a bit. So it just depends. JavaScript is a good first language to use because it is so forgiving. It's a bad language to use. It's a bad first language because it is so forgiving. You can develop bad habits. Some of the stuff, you're going to forget to put a semicolon here and there, and your program's still going to work. You're going to do the same thing next semester in C#, and it won't work. All right? And I can't give you a good reason always why something is the way it is. All right? We're going to take a break. This is what we're going to do after the break. All right? I want you to come in, and hey, you're going to have trouble with it. I get it. All right? And no, you're not going to get any points for it or anything. But what I want you to do, look on the screen, please, is I want you to come into here. I want you to open up this test average, and I want to see if you can put the same kind of logic in there. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I want you to check, and what's a valid test score? 0 to 100. Make sense? So make a constant for min grade, set it to 0, max grade, set it to 100. Look on the screen, please. Then after you put these in, validate all three of them. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're just going to replicate what we just did. But you're going to do it, same logic, different program. This is going to be very similar to what you're going to have on a test next week. So by the time we get done with it, if you're like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, that's where you should be. All right? So again, it is 8:55. Let's come back, please, at 9:10.